to the Rainbow Push Coalition page. I'm going to share this on Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.'s page. In time, I will share it on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. In case you don't know who I am and look at the crazy pop-ups in the background, I'm Santita Jackson. I host the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. And because of your support, it's become their top show. And we're on in Milwaukee and all in Madison and all around the country. Very excited to be here with you today. Because we are a nation in crisis. We're a world in crisis. As we speak, we're watching marches all around the world. We're watching marches, quite frankly, all around our nation about not just George Floyd. Certainly he is the spark, but what is in the embers? Unemployment, record unemployment. A lot of mistrust of public officials, a collapsing economy, a collapsed economy. What does all of that mean? We're going to talk about that today with a most esteemed panel as Reverend Jesse Jackson joins us. We've got Senator Elizabeth Warren. Of course, she ran this valiant campaign for the presidency. This year, we were all so proud of her, and we still are. She is a woman who has been leading the fight, not just to protect consumers, but to protect our children, to protect all of us. And we're so grateful that she's been able to share time with us today. And of course, we have got Madam President. I wish I was saying that about you, Senator Warren, but that's all right. I just want you to keep on serving wherever you are. That's all right with me. And we've got, of course, C.J. Davis. Who is she? She is head of Noble. She is also the chief of police in Durham, North Carolina, my home state. And of course, in my mother's hometown, but he is a big city mayor, Newport News Mayor, McKinley Price. We're so excited to see him sitting there, lawyer, a theologian. I'm running out of breath. Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, but he doesn't run out of energy. We're so excited about that. And we have got Reverend Jesse Jackson will be joining us in a minute. Shelley Davis, my beloved colleague from Rainbow Push and from Houston, where they will be burying George Floyd this week. And we've got Reverend Jackson Yeh, who is joining us clearly from his hotel room. But he's on the road because Senator Warren, he, of course, went to one of the memorial homegoing services for George Floyd in Minneapolis this week. And he is going to, I'm wearing black today, because we are celebrating the life of Breonna Taylor, the EMT technician who was killed in her home, in her bed. And she would have been 27 years of age. She never made it that far yesterday. So we're all part of the Say Her Name campaign. All part of the Say Her Name campaign, because this young lady should still be living today. As we get Reverend Jackson ready, let me begin with you, Senator Warren, as we welcome you to this Rainbow Push National Elected Officials Town Hall meeting. Many of us have been shocked. Well, maybe I think it was more stunned by the visual of watching someone have his life snuffed out. And you have been on the front lines of fighting for, as Reverend Jackson joins us, you've been fighting for just the least of these. One of the things that I've admired the most about you, you are contemplative, you're reflective, but you're also a woman of action. What did you make of that video when you first saw it?
Yeah, thank you, Santita, and thank you for having me today to be here with you. This is a time of such tremendous crisis, and I'm honored to have the chance to just sit in conversation and fellowship with you and with this esteemed panel. You know, I remember the first time I saw that video, and my focus, of course, was on George Floyd and on his pain and on the fact that he kept telling them, this was no accident. He kept telling them, I can't breathe. But when I watched it a second time, it was the police officer that I focused on. And the fact that the police officer seemed to know that he was being recorded, and yet just casually kept his knee on George Floyd's neck. And to me, it spoke of just a complete lack of accountability, that he could do what he wanted to do under those circumstances, not because he was in a state of passion and reason had left him. That wouldn't have been an excuse, but it wasn't even that. It was just the casualness he would never be held to account for the harm he was causing another human being. And that goes to the heart of it for me. We need a government, we need police, we need everyone to be fundamentally accountable. And that means I think we need to make changes in the law. It's part of the reason I want to be here as an ally in this fight, because we can't just go. Another time people take to the streets, people protest as they should. And then it all goes back to the same old, same old. We've got to make real change. And God, I hope that this time it is different.
I hope
Thank
so.
you.
Reverend Jackson?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Reverend.
Senator Warren, there's a kind of pandemic of the COVID-19, of police and race and poverty.
Yes.
And you know, the challenge of the alt-right, I think, invading the demonstration, burning cars, it takes attention away from the police crisis.
Uh-huh.
So he had 18 charges against him. He shields on the police. Because police have this immunity protection, and we challenge that today.
Uh-huh.
Last year, 1,000 people were killed by police. 1,000. 493 who killed people had less time than Mike Vick did about the dogs. So what's your position on this issue of police having immunity from wrongdoing?
So, thank you, Reverend Jackson, and it's an honor to be here with you this morning. The question you ask about qualified immunity, I think we just need to change that standard legally. You know, as you know, this qualified immunity and the standards that have been used have really been raised high by the courts. It's not something that was written into law by the legislature, but was raised up by the courts. And the legislature can change it. And I think that's one of the things we should do in Congress. We should change so that qualified immunity is, the standard is changed so there is real accountability. Racist violence is not new in America. We need accountability, and there are lots of ways to get it. Independent investigations, ban many of the forced practices, no more chokeholds, root out disparities across the board. But I think it's a good place to start where you identify, and that is with helping change the standards on qualified immunity. Every police officer should know that if he or she imposes this kind of pain on someone, just kills someone, there is going to be accountability.
He is the first police ever arrested killing a black man in the history of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And now a police chief arrested all 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Keith Ellison is the attorney general, so it'll be a different outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Tumultuous uprising, but we're going to see Breonna's family in Louisville today. 3 police who killed her, they're still out because of something called qualified immunity.
I know. The whole notion behind this qualified immunity, I think it's wrong. We can't, everyone should be subject to the law. And there can't be a group that is above the law. The police are there, they're sworn to serve, right? They're sworn to protect. They're not there to be above the law and not be held accountable for their actions. And I think this shows up in lots of different ways. We talk about it now with chokeholds. I believe chokeholds should be banned across this country. It should be legal to do that anywhere. And I'm a co-sponsor on a bill to make that happen. But think, for example, about Andrew Kears, who was denied medical care. He's in custody. He's having a heart attack. He can't get medical treatment. So I've committed to introduce the Andrew Kears Act to hold officers criminally liable for denying medical care to people in custody when they're in distress.
This idea of criminal liable is another dimension because when Laquan McDonald was killed in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
They held back the evidence 400 days, a $500,000 payout by the mayor. finally got out 16 times on a cover up.
Mhm.
He was arrested first time police had gone to jail in Chicago in 50 years for killing someone
Mhm.
because of qualified immunity.
Yep. But this is why we stay on it. And this is why the work that you do and the work of the Rainbow Coalition is so important about elevating these issues, lifting up these issues. You are tireless. You make your voice heard over and over and over. And I believe that we see out there today these protesters who've taken to the street, many of them for the first time, many of them young people who have never had this experience before, who say we have to change this country. It has been long enough. And we start with the focus on policing and police practices. But as you always say, it's all the way through the system. It's through the criminal justice system, but we also work on systemic racism in housing and healthcare and education, in the black-white wealth gap. Our job is to root out systemic racism everywhere.
But they say that when police are called, it says, if you ride apples, the barrel may be rotten, because when you join the police force, if you're known to tell on another officer, you can get hurt.
Yeah.
Now get promoted. So a woman in Buffalo told, and she was fired for exposing the wrongdoing inside the police department.
You know, Reverend Jackson, we also saw in Buffalo what the psychology of group behavior. And I'm going to bring in, if you, we're so honored that Senator Warren is going to be with us for the hour. And I wanted to know if you would be comfortable with a back and forth with this esteemed panel. Because we saw a 75-year-old gentleman, Senator Warren, and then you, Madam President Davis. We saw a gentleman walk up to a police officer in a peaceful way. And we saw him knocked down by the police officer. And the police officer, to his credit, and I don't think he gets it enough, I think he was even appalled by watching this man fall. And as he turned to help him, he was pushed by the next line. And so are we looking at a challenge within the culture of policing? Because we know that policing, it goes back to the slave patrols, but it also goes back to Native Americans. You know, that's where we got the Texas Rangers from.
So he was responsible for pushing that man down, watching him bleed. He had no excuse for not stopping to help him up.
But he was, okay, but Reverend, what about him being pushed by his superior officer? Because we have a militarized police force. I'm going to ask you, Senator Warren, to respond to that. But of course, the president of Noble, Madam President, the Durham, North Carolina police chief, perhaps I should just ask you that. First, I want to understand how that works. I think we all do, Madam President.
I think you're on mute.
Okay, we want to unmute you. Okay. You need to be unmuted. Okay, very good. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you again. And thank you for giving Noble the opportunity to be on this show, on this platform. We are certainly supportive of any legislative initiatives that help change what we have seen play out on the public stage in the last few days. And to the question of the incident that occurred in Buffalo, what we saw was a culture that was accepting something very, very contrary to what we are called to do, to protect and to serve. And to see an elderly person pushed to the pavement, I thought about my grandfather. I thought about, an elderly neighbor. And this man came in a peaceful way. And not only was he pushed to the pavement, an officer who tried to assist was ushered away by a supervisor. That tells you we have a systemic problem in police agencies where you can walk past an individual in crisis and not do anything.
While he was bleeding.
That's right. While he was bleeding on the ground. again, in a climate like this, as we are addressing the horrific death of George Floyd, that officers still are not connecting that we have a problem with use of force. So some of the legislation that our great Senator Warren is talking about is also in a proposal that we've submitted to Congress as well. And I'm sure Senator Warren will see Noble's request. You have absolutely hit some of those key areas. If there were only 3 things that were done at that scene with George Floyd: failure to intervene, failure to render aid, failure to de-escalate. 3 things, if one of those things had been addressed, George Floyd would be alive today. So our position is that there has to be national standards. Noble was founded for this very reason: systemic racism in police culture, in police agencies across the country. We have worked on use of force policies. We have worked on implicit bias, racial equity. We have youth programs to help teach young people how to have safe encounters with the police. But there are 18,000 police agencies around the country who are allowed to look at policies like a smorgasbord. I'll pick this one, but we don't need that one. There has to be national standards. If we don't push legislation for national standards for police accountability and reform, we will see these instances over and over again. And our communities are begging for us to stand up and use our voices to impact change and impact change now.
But the law will challenge, because Dr. King would often say that the culture makes you don't want me to sit on the front of a bus. It's illegal to make me get up. The law will change the culture, in ways the culture will only reinforce the law. My point is, he knew George Floyd. George Floyd had a white girlfriend. She has a white supremacist dressed up as a policeman. His motive was not just impersonal, in my judgment.
We do. And Reverend Jackson, I want to acknowledge Congressman, your colleague on the House side, Senator Warren, Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia, from the 4th Congressional District. And your camera is just fine, Congressman. We just want you to know that. And we'd like you to respond to Madam President from the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, Noble, aptly named, I might add. She was just speaking of national standards. And of course, you, Senator Warren, spoke to the fact that this police officer, Devin Chauvin, knew that he was being recorded. And so did the other gentleman in Buffalo.
Yes.
He knew that he was being recorded too, interestingly, by Buffalo's NPR. And it seems to me that, Congressman Johnson, as we're looking at a call for national standards, that even when the police are recorded, they're supposed to have cameras all around them, Mayor Price out of Newport News. Even when they're recorded, there's still malfeasance. They still misbehave. What can we do? What can you do legislatively?
Unmute yourself, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the call. And I want to acknowledge being on the panel with such fine people, human beings, who happen to be in positions of power and influence. And these are the kinds of people that the president of Noble, Senator Warren, and the rest of your team. These are the kinds of people that we need in these positions during these days, during these troubled times. And these are the people who will usher in the change that's needed, because what is clearly happening is that police throughout the country have been operating within a climate of impunity. They know that they can get away with shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight, just like the president. and they're able to get away with it because nobody will call them for their misdeeds. And the way that you call law enforcement officers for their misdeeds is to subject them to the same laws that they are charged with enforcing. No person should be above the law because of the job that they have. And police officers have often been above the law because simply they are police officers. And so that kind of culture has existed for so long in America that it causes people to understand that even if I'm on video for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with my knee on the neck of a suspect, I can get away with that because nobody's going to call me on it. And so when you start calling officers on their misconduct, then like they did in the incident, I forget where it is, where the older gentleman, the 75-year-old gentleman, was pushed back, shoved to the ground. He lost his balance after being shoved, falling backwards, and he hit his head on the pavement. And then the blood started oozing out. And then the officer wanted to assist him, but his supervisor pushed him on, and he went ahead and went with the supervisor. That thin blue line where everybody has to conform. Well, though that group of officers there has now been a police backlash to the suspension of the two officers, the two shoving officers without pay. There's been a backlash. That squad, that special tactical squad that 53 officers served on, they have all resigned from that squad in protest for the fact that the department and the mayor's office in Buffalo, New York, that's where that was, held these two officers accountable. And so when you hold folks, when folks are not used to being held accountable, then they feel like they can lash back. This is the final throes of this kind of impunity by police because Congress is getting ready to take some action. And Reverend Jackson, I knew you wanted to say something.
The Federation Police is a mayor's nightmare. He should be able to fire the 57. He cannot. These police have a union immunity, lets them live above the law, and that's why you guys. We're going to Louisville today, where Breonna was killed by three police. They're still walking free. We want three things. One, we want to make lynching a federal crime. Lynching is not a federal crime. Lynching is a federal crime. Rand Paul's against it in Kentucky. We're taking them on today. Secondly, immunity from police protection when they live above the law, as well as to make all these deals with police made public. And we need support, Senator Warren, on this, making lynching a federal crime.
Oh, you've got it. Yes.
Senator Warren?
Yes, the making lynching a federal crime was introduced in the United States more than 100 years ago. And it has come up, it's gotten majority votes, by the way, over and over, but with filibuster, never made it through the Senate. And finally, on the day that we were honoring George Floyd, thought we had it so that we could pass by unanimous consent the bill that had come through the House that would make lynching a federal crime, finally, to show just a little spark of Congress moving in the right direction. And then Rand Paul said no and held the whole bill up. And that means it would have to have what's called floor time. And it's not clear that Mitch McConnell, whether or not he will even let us bring it to the
We're going to Kentucky today. We're going to challenge him in Kentucky.
And that's exactly right, Reverend Jackson. Go to Kentucky, raise this up, hold our elected leaders accountable, including those who won't let us make lynching a federal crime.
Well,
And
what,
Reverend Jackson, if you don't mind, I'd like to remind people to send us questions to rainbowpush.org questions and comments, and also send us questions and comments to the Rainbow Push Facebook page and the Reverend Jesse Jackson Senior page. And Reverend Jackson, after you, we'd like to hear from a mayor, the mayor of Newport News, Virginia, in the great state of Virginia. Reverend Jackson.
Santita, we tend to think of civil rights started in 55, Rosa Parks, not the king. Almost 5,000 blacks were lynched after 1880 and 1950. A form of terror to depopulate the South. They have burned blacks alive, mutilated blacks. And there were no cameras. Lynching is a horrible crime, and it's a crime against humanity. We must make lynching a federal crime. We must remove police immunity when they break the law, and that's in part our mission today. So far.
Well, Reverend, as we look at as we've been looking at what happened in Minneapolis, we saw the mayor of Minneapolis criticized for his strong pushback against what happened to George Floyd. We do see mayors under siege. We see increasingly progressive mayors, African-American mayors, women who are elected to become mayors, and they have gutted budgets. And we find out just how the limits of their powers. Mayor McKinley Price of Newport News, Virginia. Interestingly, in Virginia, which is also a great military state, right? What do you see? What about these 57 police officers, as Congressman Johnson correctly cited, who all resigned because these two officers were criticized? I mean, you're looking at the culture. I mean, what can you do? And what do you, in an ideal world, what should a mayor be able to do?
Should have been fired.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Reverend.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. And as president of African American Mayors Association, my heart certainly goes out to those minority mayors, like in Richmond, Houston, Atlanta, and St. Paul, that are, on the forefront dealing with this violence and this issue. And I want to say something. I hope I'm not saying something that's wrong. But when you look at how culture is embedded in the system, let's look at integration. Before it became the law to do something, there was a culture. Everybody accepted things as they were. And this is going to have to do the same thing. The citizens are doing their part with the protesting. It's now the national leadership, like Senator Elizabeth Warren and other people in Congress, are going to have to make the laws different so that this culture can be broken up. I was in the Army. I know about esprit de corps, and I know about, your fellow man and what you can and cannot do. But when it's wrong and when it becomes illegal and when you're going to be punished for those actions, that's the only thing that's going to break this culture up, because it is strong.
Mr. Mayor, the culture comes from the law of permissiveness. The worst thing happened was worse than Dred Scott, which said blacks and the rights, whites around respect. This was in slavery. In the Plessy versus Ferguson, it's separate equal. Separate meant we separate. One group had the right to vote, one did not. 687 lynchings in Georgia, not one indictment. 700 in Mississippi. 200 in Virginia, 187 in Kentucky. The culture of lynching, which was in fact looked over by the federal government and used by the states to drive. The Indians were driven by a trail of tears west. Blacks were driven north by a trail of blood and bloodhounds. And so it's the horror of lynching is really an untold American. Brian Stevenson from the Lynching Museum in Montgomery has the best read on it, but we must take seriously the impact of the culture of lynching.
Absolutely, sir.
Mayor Price, before we go to you, Barbara Arnwine, because you would take this to the courts, and of course, Reverend Urey would take this to the Court of Public Opinion as a minister, but he'd also take to the courts as now a newly minted lawyer. Mayor Price, how do you reshape the culture? Because we saw Mayor Frye in Minneapolis. He came out, he was very strong. He was criticized by the president. Of course, that's not surprising, but he did take a lot of heat for being so forward and being so strong and so aggressive in his defense of the people, not the police. We're seeing what's happening to Mayor de Blasio. He's been under heat since he got into office because he was really trying to help the people, balance that with the needs of the police. How we do that now, in the age of Breonna Taylor, in the age of George Floyd, in the age of Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed by a former police officer and his son.
Well, I tell you, you have to put in time on the front end. And I'll just give you an example here in Newport News. You know, when I was on the school board, they were appointed school board members. After I got off, an all-white male council decided not to reappoint a minority. At the same time, they closed some basketball courts in a neighborhood because they were too noisy. And there was a bridge that was deemed unsafe connecting an affluent neighborhood with a poor neighborhood. All done by an all-white male council in a 2-week period during the Rodney King era. An organization started called People to People, a local organization. A white lawyer and I joined together and we started having meetings about the disparities in the neighborhood. And for over 20 years, we start talking about getting out of your comfort zone and being in another person's place, what was happening systemically in our city. He got his paper at 5:30 in the morning on Sunday. I got mine at 10:30. I can't get a pizza delivered to my house, and I've got a congressman and a state senator living on my street. It's the inequities that you have to point out and show how those small things. I can stand in a grocery line and watch 5 people from a clerk say, good morning, and come to me and I get ignored. These are the types of things people have to see the impact on. These are the things that you have to get people to understand how it can escalate and how it can influence your behavior. And I think we have been very fortunate, and things could blow up tonight, and I'm not trying to take any credit for it, but we have been very fortunate on the front end of getting our police, our major industries, our health system, all involved in trying to eliminate tick by tick the inequities that we can see in this city so that people will understand some reaction that you do, including the press, how they can slant, you know, why is it where this person went to school have anything to do with the crime they committed? You know, these types of things have to be pointed out to them to show their institutional racism that is involved in decisions have to be one by one eliminated.
But a generation of humane mayors is the reason why no police has killed anyone during these demonstrations. There's no shoot to kill orders.
Hmm.
I think about last week while we were focusing on George Floyd's funeral services, election in Iowa, a racist congressman was defeated. And a woman was elected mayor of Ferguson, Missouri.
Yes.
And the law changed, the culture changes. The culture said go to the back of the bus. The sign above the driver's head, red color from the rear, white from the front. We live under the law. We need a law to protect us. Law changes culture.
Absolutely. And because each state has their own laws unless there is national standards, it's not going to change.
That's right.
Well,
As Captain said.
Absolutely. And before we come to you, Attorney Arnwine, I'd like to bounce this back to Congressman Johnson, because Senator Warren did speak to the anti-lynching laws, that we're having such a hard time pushing those through. I mean, what is the problem, Congressman Johnson, and then you, Senator Warren, and then you, Attorney Arnwine, if you would speak to this issue. Congressman Johnson, is there anything that the citizens can do? What do you need us to help you do in Congress in order to make lynching the crime that it is?
Yeah, it's important that each of your listeners be registered to vote and actually exercise that vote in a way that will create change. The same people in office on the Republican side who stand at the schoolhouse door, so to speak, figuratively speaking, and bar entrance to Black folks. They're doing that to legislation such as the anti-lynching bill, which is a very common sense. The time has long since come for that legislation to be able to pass the Senate. It's passed the House, but you got people standing at the schoolhouse door saying pretty much in effect, segregation now, segregation forever, or racial discrimination, lynching now, lynching forever. We've got to get rid of those people, and we have an opportunity to do so in November. We can elect a group of senators where Democrats who reflect our values much more than the Republican Party does. We can elect Democrats to control the Senate. And once that happens, we'll be able to move legislation through the Senate as it moves through the House. And also, we have to elect a new president, someone who's going to sign these bills into law. And so for all of those out there who think that my vote doesn't matter, there's so many examples of people winning elections by 1 or 2 votes out of millions casts. Your vote does count, and you need to exercise that right. And so if you're not registered, you need to get registered. And once you get registered, you need to make sure that you don't miss election day. It's easy to let it slide by, but take advantage of early voting. Take advantage of vote by mail, which is essentially vote from home. Lots of people who are on this video conference call are getting applications from their state authorities to apply for absentee ballots. And you need to fill those applications out. They're not complicated. And if they are too complicated, then ask someone to help you get those applications back in quickly so that you can get your absentee ballot so that you can vote by mail. White folks have been voting by mail for decades. Never been any problems with it. Black folks tend to like to go to the polling place and cast their ballot. They want to know that their ballot is being counted. And so they like to go, and lots of folks like to wait until election day instead of taking advantage of early voting. But what happens on election day when so many people show up, the lines get long, and the authorities have been trying to make sure that they stay as long as those lines are as long as possible to dissuade you from standing in the line and voting. So don't wait until the last day to vote. Vote during early voting if you insist on going to vote in person. But I would encourage everybody to do what they can to vote by mail. Vote from home in the convenience of your home. Fill out that ballot and make sure that you know who you're voting for. Don't just vote for where it says incumbent and you don't know who that person is. So we can take charge in November. We can change the political landscape so that we can get more legislation passed, like the Justice in Policing Act, which will be filed on Monday, House and Senate versions. We're going to pass it in the House, but we may not be able to pass it in the Senate. Although I know that we have allies like Senator Warren who are going to be doing their best to get it passed.
And what is that act? So, Reverend,
before you go to Barbara, I want to say this. We've had Democratic houses and before Congress people. They deal with the horrible lynching is a crime against humanity. Once you pass, you can who the lynchman, who were the mobsters in the lynching. These were these were judges and these were ministers.
Exactly.
They bring people at stake. I mean, the impact of depopulating the South with lynching as a form of terrorism, just having a Democrat president will not change that, because the Southerners resist it because it has family ties to it. It's deep, and the impact of a lynching. What we saw in the case of George Floyd was a lynching. The agony of the slow agony. You'll never be able to erase it from your mind. Somebody was shot is one thing. can lynch and burn somebody at the stake, burn the whole towns of people. People sundown clauses. Lynching is a horrible crime that affects the American psyche.
Well, Reverend Jackson, before we go to Attorney Arnwine, because we need to find out how we fight this in the courts, Senator Warren, people do want to know, as you and Congressman Johnson, you all both occupy that same body of legislative body in Washington, D.C. Can you name a senator or two, aside from Senator Paul, who are standing in the way of letting this anti-lynching law go through?
Well, right now, it's Senator Paul who's put himself squarely in the way and kept this from passing the Senate, which then means it would have been ready to go to President Trump to be signed into law. You know, I just want to underscore what the congressman was saying. Congressman Johnson is so right about this, about the importance of elections and holding our elected officials accountable. When Reverend Jackson said, well, but we've had people before who didn't step up, he's right. It's not only that we have to elect them, we then have to hold them accountable for what they do. You know, on the anti-lynching, Senators Harris and Booker have really carried this and pushed it to the front. When others were willing to ignore it, when Republicans said, we don't want to talk about this, they just kept after it. And it is the energy they put behind it. It's the reminder. Elections are there for both halves. They're there to say, when you've got someone like Rand Paul who's going to block important legislation that we should pass, and we should pass unanimously, then he should be held accountable, because we can get good people in office, people who are willing to be in this fight. And that's what we have the opportunity to do in November. We have the opportunity to take Donald Trump out of the White House and put Joe Biden in the White House, a man who is determined to fight from the heart and to build opportunity, not just for some of us, but for all of us. So that's how I see this. And I just want to add, you know, one of the things that is now in the House bill that passed and that we're working on in the Senate in the response to the COVID-19 crisis is a provision on voting, so that no one is required to choose between your health and being able to exercise your right as a citizen to vote. I know that the congressman has pushed for this, and I really admire all that Congressman Johnson has done on this. I'm pushing for this. We want to make sure that there's enough money. I think it's about $4 billion that we believe should be in this, so we can have in-person voting and do it safely, as well as vote by mail. We need to support our voting. This is the beating heart of our democracy. The Republicans understand this. They want to suppress the vote. They want people not to vote. They want people to be discouraged. They want to hear that it doesn't matter. But we know better. And it's less than 5 months now until that November election. So we've got to get Congress to act now to make sure there's enough money, enough support. I'll say on this one, you can go to elizabethwarren.com/democracy is one of the places. Obviously, go to Rainbow Push. We've got a place where you can click right through and send letters to your senators, send letters to your representative, and understand, even if you have Democrats who are representing you, as Reverend Jackson said, everybody can use a little push to be able to elevate this issue, because it is so important. If we want to make change, we've got to be able to do this together. We've got to make sure they hear our voices loud and strong.
Well, as we go to this is the perfect run-up for you, Attorney Arnwine. I just want you to know that one of our Facebook, more than a few of our Facebook viewers are saying that they want you to be the vice presidential nominee. Attorney Arnwine. I think that would be a capital idea. But you tell me. Because she just queued this up to voting, because I hear Congressman Johnson, I hear Mayor Price, Reverend Jackson, always Senator Warren, I know Reverend Urey, and I know you, Chief Davis, I know you, the vote. the vote is at the heart of everything. And you sees day in and day out, in and out of season, you're always pushing for the vote. Is that at the heart of this issue that we're dealing with right now today?
Absolutely. And, let me be very clear that, the Transformative Justice Coalition and I've been working on, these issues of policing forever. I teach this, by the way, in law school, at UCLA, at Columbia, at NCCU, where I've taught. And what I, point out is that in addition to everything that's been said, there's only one thing I haven't heard that is so key to policing reform, and that is the ending of broken windows policing. Broken windows, without broken windows, you never have a Mike Brown. You never have an Alton Sterling. Frankly, you never have a George Floyd being killed. All of that comes out of what's called broken policing windows, which leads to over-policing and brutalized policing. That policy should be banned, yet it is ubiquitous throughout police departments in the United States. If you don't ban that, it doesn't matter what you say about excessive force, etc. You're going to still have these problems. Banning broken window policing.
Excuse me, one moment, Attorney Arnwine, Reverend Jackson.
Explain that policy, Barbara.
Yes, broken windows policing, it is a concept that sadly has never been proven to be accurate. But the theory is that whenever you see a minor violation, that you come down hard on it as if it were a felony crime. So that if you see somebody jaywalking, which is what happened with Mike Brown, right? He was walking in the middle of the street, and that's why he was stopped by, Wilson. And, and it says that when you see these violations, you see jaywalking, you treat it like it's murder or robbery. You come down just as hard on the violator in the theory that if you intersect minor offenses harshly, that it will prevent the minor offender from ever becoming a major criminal, a major offender. It's a terrible concept. It has led to all of these horrible interactions between Blacks and policing. It really needs to stop. It is at the core of our problem. It's part of the root of what's wrong with policing. And I tried to get the 21st Century Policing Commission to ban it, to recommend it. They wouldn't, because it's so ingrained in policing. You can't, on the one hand, say you're going to terrorize communities and make people fear the police, and on the other hand, say that you want to be community policing and be our friends. You got to, you really got to get this professionally right. And so that's the problem with broken windows policing. I just want to put that out there because it's so important. And somebody,
if I could, because you bring out, just hold on one moment, because I want you to go back to the vote. But yes. I'd like for Durham, North Carolina Chief, yes. C.J. Davis, the head of Noble, to respond to what you just said about that, because it seems that that particular issue, the broken windows issue, is what is getting everybody killed.
It is.
I mean,
a lot of it. It's a lot of it.
Should I say, it's the excuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly support Attorney Arnwine's position, because it goes back to what we're talking about the culture of policing.
Nice.
My favorite mantras in my industry is the speed of the leader is the speed of the troop. If you don't have leaders that embrace the communities that they serve, then the culture of that department is going to fall in line with the philosophy and the traditions of policing. And as I said before, there are 18,000 police agencies around this country. How do we convince 18,000 chiefs to change their philosophies unless there is some legislation and some mayors and other individuals to make sure that who's leading that organization has that community at heart? So some of what we see, just as in Buffalo, how do you have 57 people in a department that basically endorsed that it was okay to knock a 75-year-old man down. That tells you a lot about the organization.
Absolutely.
Precisely.
Absolutely.
But
Right.
not
And-
96% of the police don't live in Minneapolis.
That's right.
Right.
Detroit, and so they come
Right.
in today as hired guns.
That's
And
right. So, and I'm not going to be long, but I just want to say this. As a leader in my community, I tell people all the time, I don't wake up in the morning with this uniform on. I wake up in the morning as an African-American woman that is very much in tune to the pulse of my community. I know what they want, I know what they need, and I know what my responsibility is running an agency of 600 officers that are not from the community, don't know the history of the community, don't know the ills of the community. So I have history taught in my recruit classes about the injustices that occur in that community in the past, so that those community members and those officers understand what the problems have been historically in that community, and they can connect with those community members and they understand why people feel some kind of way. But I appreciate Attorney Barbara Arnwine with your concept there that legislation can only touch the surface of use of force. Until we deal with disciplinary matrices that ensure that officers do not continue to rotate in and out of police agencies around this country, especially after they have demonstrated to everybody that they could care less about a 75-year-old, those individuals shouldn't be able to leave. Believe me, those 57 are headed to somebody else's police department.
Absolutely.
Well, then let me ask you, Attorney Arnwine, because I am going to get right back to you, because I want to weave in some of what people are asking on Facebook too.
Yes.
Chief Davis, what about Black officers who would have a heightened sense of responsibility to their communities, who wake up as you do, and other officers of a heightened consciousness who are woke, as the kids say? Is there anything Noble can do to protect them? I mean, what are you doing, or what can you do programmatically to give them support?
So, and part of our training and part of our mentoring is to help officers to understand what their responsibility is, number one, as a police officer, and as an African-American who is intimately tied to the community. You have a responsibility to ensure that racial injustices don't occur in your community. So much of it has to do with giving them the support when they decide, I'm going to intervene and do the right thing, that they aren't thrown to the wolves by the other officers, and that culture, which is tightly woven culture in police agencies, doesn't beat them down. And it needs to become the norm as opposed to being an anomaly that you speak out. It should be that we will not put up with it, that you can't work here if that's how you operate. And that police departments should be representative of the communities that they serve. So when you see a police department that's full of white officers and they are serving minority communities, the speed of the leader is the speed of the truth. The leader has not ensured that department is diversified, not just with African Americans, but with women, not just in the bottom ranks, but all through the organization. That's why Noble was started, because organizations didn't give us an opportunity to raise to the top. And we can't change agency unless we're represented in those levels that impact change.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, you know, but that brings us back to Congressman, Reverend, if you don't mind, because we've got a tight timeline. Of course, you're going to close everything out. Congressman Johnson, this brings us back to you and your legislation on policing. Does this touch any of what you're trying to do legislatively?
Yes, I think it's important that the culture of policing change into one where police officers understand and feel that they are accountable to the communities that they are charged with protecting and serving. And so there are a plethora of reforms that are set forth in the Justice in Policing Act, which will be filed or introduced in Congress on Monday. I'm just getting a copy of the final draft of the legislation, but that legislation is, from what I can see, is going to it's going to result in some big positive changes to this climate of unaccountability. It's going to bring about some accountability. First thing, in terms of changing the law that officers are prosecuted under for violating civil rights, this legislation is going to make it less onerous for prosecutors to be able to get convictions for violating civil rights. And that's going to be a good facet of this bill. And also, Reverend Jackson, the sovereign immunity doctrine as it now exists is going to be reformed and replaced with a new standard under this in the Justice in Policing Act. Those two measures right there, to be able to hold officers criminally and civilly responsible, is going to go a long way towards reform. And then there are another provisions in there that have to do with training, that have to do with reporting of data. It'll stop the migration of bad officers from one department to the other. Just a number of new things that it gets at police training with some national standards, bans on chokeholds and carotid holds that cut off the blood flow. There's going to be different standards for justification for the use of deadly force that officers have been able to depend on. And so what I'm seeing are some good provisions in this new package that will be introduced by Senators Booker and Harris on Monday in the Senate, and by Representatives Nadler and Karen Bass, our CBC chair, will be the sponsors of the legislation in the House. And so there will be a lot of activities going on next week that will explain to the public or that will roll out this new legislation. You'll be able to hear from experts about what's in it and what effect it's going to have on policing as we move forward. So good things are coming.
The content of change from victims. One reason why I admire the work of Senator Warren so much is that the idea of consumer protection, we've been robbed legally every day. The idea of a wealth tax, I mean, she said a small percentage, 50 billion HBCUs. That's not just changing, that means changing content, not just changing leadership. The poverty is a pandemic, and COVID-19 is a pandemic. We put code blue, COVID-19, and poverty all through those hits at the same time.
Absolutely. And Reverend Uri, you've been waiting patiently. We're gonna of course go back to you, Barbara Arnwine, and then we're gonna go around the whole panel so we can get some closing thoughts. But CNN is reporting that these Buffalo police officers have been arrested for assault. And of course, in Baltimore, we have Freddie Gray, which is your home base. And we have a lot of issues in Baltimore. We have a lot of issues everywhere. What have you been hearing on this panel today? And what are you hearing in Baltimore and around the country?
Well, having lived through Baltimore, in Louisville, to receive Reverend here in a few hours, your earlier comment about changing the court of public opinion, actually, I would do something slightly different. And it's the piece that's been often overlooked in these conversations when we're trying to get structural change. We talk about changing broken windows policing, but we never dig deep and deal with the issues of why the broken windows were there in the first place, which then gets us to the question of the Kerner Commission report, which rightly pointed out not only the issues of white racism, but also the issues of pointing out that usually the police incidents that triggered the uprisings that we saw in the 60s they were the trigger, they weren't the source. And unless we're going to make sure that we deal with a comprehensive, almost an omnibus approach to dealing with this transformation, dealing with the conditions of housing inadequacy, poverty, all of the disparities that calls for a holistic analysis, then we can do whatever we want to on the surface. You're going to be back here again. And if we don't change the reality, the one case that keeps coming back to me that, you know, when you go to law school, they make you read all these cases and some of them just kind of strike you in terms of the reasoning. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion in Hine v. North Carolina. It's a 2014 case where a traffic stop precipitated by a police officer's belief that having a broken taillight was a violation of state law led to a subsequent search that yielded contraband in the car. When they tried to suppress the search, here's what the Supreme Court said in 2014, that a police officer's reasonable mistake of law does not necessarily negate any reasonable seizure of anything that flows from it. Translation, you can be a police officer called to enforce the law and not know the law. It is the most asinine conclusion that we could reach. So here's what I would do rather than go to the court of public opinion. I would go to the room where it happens to champion what happens from our dear soundtrack in Hamilton. Very often the community doesn't show up to the hearings when these bills are being heard at the local and state level. I would be in those rooms getting on the record to make sure that the voices are heard when they start negotiating language, because the final language of the bill actually can change the meaning of what the bill's going to be designed to do. I would ask Congressman Johnson and Senator Warren to consider in any legislation that there ought to be a standardized periodic review of every department that receives any sort of federal funding, that there has to be a periodic review of the patterns and the practices of that department to ensure that there is compliance with constitutional policing. That way, we don't have to wait for arbitrary decisions by changes in administrations to determine whether or not we're going to investigate departments, as we've seen with the Trump administration. So before I would go to the court of public opinion, I would go to the courtroom of the legislature to change their opinions, to let them know that they have the requisite backup to be able to change the laws in meaningful ways.
Chief Davis, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, Dr. You all, thank you so much for these comments, because that holistic approach is so important. You know, in my industry, I can tell you, as a person that's been in this industry for 34 years, what I know about the system of policing. But it's those other underlining issues that have to be in place in order to make sure that whatever is put out is carried through. And all of the funding that law enforcement agencies get around the country, I mean, millions of dollars of federal funds to support their departments, they should not be allowed to receive funds unless they are nationally accredited. Mm-hmm. There are already accreditation standards in place, and the laws that are coming out will only enhance those accreditation standards. It's a matter of just requiring police agencies that you will absolutely be accredited, because that system audits you every 2 years anyway, to make sure that you're following these policies, procedures. And it really gets into some of these other underlying issues of racial equity training, of making sure that you have matrices in your department, that officers who have committed offenses over and over again don't get to stay in your department. All kinds of checks and balances. So I totally agree with that. That there should be policies, procedures that are tied to police funding as well.
Absolutely. Attorney Arnwine, I've interrupted you a couple of times. It's not that I've wanted to, but we're trying to go with the flow of the conversation. And I thank you for being so patient. We're in an election season. Believe it or not, everybody, yes. We're still in the midst of election 2020. And the vote is at the heart of it. We've heard talk about vote by mail. There's pushback by the administration on voting by mail, although many of them vote by mail, including the president. Voting, how does that fit into all that we've been discussing today?
Well, it fits really strongly. First of all, I want everyone to know that, we have elections coming up on the 9th, June 9th, in 5 states. You have statewide primaries, including Georgia. Georgia has several major races and the statewide. So Georgia, get your vote on, get ready. One other thing I want to really point out is that the most important thing voters need to know right now, when you get ready to vote, is vote down ballot. There's a tendency for people to only vote at the top of the ticket, or to only focus on who they're voting for the top of the ticket. And they forget that all these issues, if you're mad about Arbery, if you're mad about Breonna Taylor, if you're mad about these DAs not prosecuting people, then guess what? You vote for the top prosecutor. You actually cast a ballot for that prosecutor. And you need to really know who's running. And if the prosecutor, the DA, the county attorney, the state's attorney, whatever they may be called in your area, is not running on a reform agenda, don't vote for them. You need to vote for people who are saying, this is one of the things I'm going to do. I'm going to hold people who engage in hate crimes accountable. I'm going to hold police accountable. I'm going to do my job. I mean, that's what you need. And that's what's wrong in too many places. You also need to concentrate on your judges. Judges run for office in almost all these counties. And you should be knowing who they are, because they're going to make a lot of the decisions about how cases get handled, etc. Sheriff is so important. It's one of the most overlooked positions, but people should know who's running for sheriff because they have a lot of authority, once again, over law enforcement. You need to look at clerk of court. Also, you want to look at whoever appoints the police chief. If it's the mayor, if it's the county executive, who are you getting as that leader that Chief Davis kept talking about? Who is going to be that, who is being appointed? You need to be putting measures on the ballot, fighting for measures for community control of policing. That goes to everything. When you talk about abolition, defunding, proper allocation of resources, all of that goes to community control. And so we need more of that. The other thing I wanted to say about voting is that, vote by mail is important. Having actual polling site, on safe polling sites with secure machines that are not hackable, but also that are clean and won't make people sick. All of that's important, but also you want to talk about drive-up voting. You got to have all these options. Drive-up voting is so ignored, yet when you look at the states that everybody's talking about emulating, Washington and Oregon and Colorado, the big vote-by-mail states, they all have some form of drive-up voting. And drive-up voting means that you're able to drop your ballot in a drop box. You're able to have it collected outside of a polling place. You're able to do curbside voting. All of those change the game dramatically for voter turnout and for voter participation, and especially for our people. One thing I want people to be very clear about is that vote by mail, until we do some serious intervention and serious work, so far has not been as successful for Blacks as it's been for whites. You can have, in states like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, you can have tremendous increases in the white voter participation, up 14, 20%, whatever, and still have a decrease in Black voter participation, Latino voter participation, Native American voter participation because of other barriers. And I mean, just think about it. In order to apply to get a mail-in ballot in Pennsylvania, you had to go online or you had to call up your department if you knew how to do it and request a ballot, or put something in the mail requesting one. The reality is that 29% of all Black households in Philadelphia do not have internet access. And let me be clear, I'm talking about not even a smartphone, no internet access. So we got to understand these barriers and work on them. We got to be smart. But don't forget, folks, when you're voting, vote your full ballot, vote your power, vote what you got. Let's do this, because we have the power to change this system that worries us, this system that is killing us, this system that is breaking our futures by giving people criminal records, and then they can't get employed, and all the other barriers that result from that. We have to use our vote. Vote full ballot, vote down ballot.
Amen to that. You know what? This has been such a marvelous meeting. We want to, on behalf of the National Rainbow Push Coalition, this National Elected Officials Town Hall meeting, we want to thank you all for being with us as we go around this fantastic panel and get closing thoughts. I wanted to point out a couple of things. I want to thank the audience for their support. It's been overwhelming. I'm sorry that we were not able to get to all of your questions, but we do hope that as the conversation was guided, that the spirit of some of your questions were answered. I want to say, as we go to you, Senator Warren, because you stayed overtime, and I know every second, every millisecond of the day is very, very important to each of you, particularly our elected officials whom we're holding to account. Mayor Price, Congressman Johnson, we're counting every little thing. But as I ask you for your closing remarks, I want you to know that there is overwhelming support for you to be the vice president on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Oh yes, she's all over my feed. So we just wanted to let you know that. But your closing thoughts, and thank you so much for being with us today, particularly overtime.
Well, thank you, Santita, for having me here, for bringing us all together. I want to thank you. I want to thank Reverend Jackson. I want to thank everyone who's here. It is such an honor to be here with you in this time of tremendous crisis. And I also particularly want to lift up Chief Davis and the work she has done, President Davis, with Noble, with 18,000 police departments across this country. The only way we're going to change is if we get real federal standards. And I know that Congressman Johnson is working for that. I'm working for that. We're going to keep pushing. I'm here in Washington, and I'm watching the protesters out on the street here. Across the country, people are protesting to try to give voice to the injustice, to the pain, to the trauma that Black Americans have endured for far too long, and to demand justice for George Floyd and for Breonna Taylor and for Ahmaud Arbery and for so many more, and so many whose names we will never know. As I see it now more than ever, the mission and the mandate of the Rainbow Push Coalition is vitally important. But we all know the truth, and that is the fight for social, racial, and economic justice is far from over. This is a moment of crisis, but I believe this is the moment that we have been called to. And it is an honor to fight shoulder to shoulder with every one of you. Thank you for giving me the chance to be here.
Thank you for your service. You have been a special education teacher, a single mom, a lawyer, Harvard law professor, presidential candidate, but always, always, always a fighter for the least of these. And thank you. I say to you, Chief Davis, Attorney Argwine, I think that as women, we can just say to her just how much your candidacy has meant to us in particular. For those of us who have daughters and goddaughters, we just thank God for you and your work in a particular way, particularly as a progressive, an unmitigated, unrepentant progressive. How about that? Love that. Blessings to you. I'm going to save you for last, Chief Davis, because we're talking about policing, and I think that you need to wrap this up for us. Mayor Price, give us some marching orders, please. Because the person that before we get to our congresspersons who we all know and love, in the upper or lower house, we see our mayors almost every day. What do you need us to do?
Well, I think there are things that we can do as mayors. First of all, what Chief Davis talked about is having standards. I proudly say for the third year in a row through CALEA, we're triple rated. We believe in standards. When I interviewed our police chief, I didn't want to know about his techniques, his tactics. I wanted to know about him as a person. What do you believe in? How do you treat people less fortunate than you? Do you go into minority communities? Do you knock on doors? What do you have your recruits to do? Are you trying to increase minority recruitment, which is difficult, getting minority officers to join our police force? But we've done it. He's committed to at least the next several classes of a standard of how many Spanish speaking and how many minorities, Black, are going to be on this force, period. The other thing is, when we're promoting our sergeants, we have citizens on the panel. They are going to ask different questions of those people. The other thing that the chief is going to propose actually next week is that for every 6 officers, there's a sergeant who will come to the scene of any force incident. We know statistically, the sooner you have a higher level at the scene, you de-escalate the situation. So we're trying to institute those things. And I think there are things that mayors can do, and hopefully they will do them. But thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
Honored that you're with us today down in Newport News, my mother's hometown. Love it, love it. Congressman Johnson, you've done such great work down through the years, and none more important than now your work on policing. What is it, and what do you need citizens all over the country to do to support you in this work?
Well, thank you so much, Santita, for hosting this panel. You've done an excellent job of bringing out the diversity of views that we all hold, but we're all committed to justice and equal rights under the law. And I was born in 1954, and so I came up under the tutelage of Reverend Jesse Jackson. I came up under the example of Reverend Jesse Jackson. It's hard for me to get out of my mind the picture of Reverend Jackson on the balcony at the Lorraine Hotel moments after Dr. King was assassinated. And since that time, he has been, or really before that time, but throughout the time, all the way to this point, Reverend Jackson has been involved in that fight. Now, we are in a period of militarization of police forces around the country. And so I don't like to talk in terms of battlefields, but I have to say that Reverend Jackson has been on the battlefield of civil rights for decade after decade throughout my entire life. And I'm 65 years old. And so I want to just take this time I can't thank Reverend Jackson enough for his personal sacrifice for the movement and for all that he has done in this quest for civil rights for everyone out here, particularly Black people. And so I want to thank you, Reverend Jackson, for all that you've done and all that you continue to do to advance the cause of equal justice under the law for all people. And please know, audience, that you have people in the Senate like Elizabeth Warren, who are, as you say, Santita, unapologetic about their progressiveness, and they are staunch allies of Black people. And I feel like you, if she were the vice presidential selectee, I would be very happy with that. But whoever that vice president selectee is going to be, I'm going to be supporting Joe Biden. It's important that we elect him. It's important that we go to the polls and elect Democrats in November. From the top of the ticket through the Senate, House of Representatives. Now, when you start getting on a local level, I'm not going to go down as far as state and local, but do know who you're voting for and what they stand for, and do cast that vote. And thank you all for hosting this event today. Chief Davis is the truth. Enjoy being on this panel. Reverend Yeary, Mayor Price, the doctor who I didn't get his name, but he talked about the U.S. Supreme Court case. I want you to know, brother, that I'm a 27-year criminal defense lawyer before coming to Congress, served 12 years as a judge, and I understand you. I feel you. So thank you, everyone.
You got to get to Baltimore and hear him preach at Douglas Memorial Community Church. Do not die first. Brilliant, brilliant preacher as well. Let me go to you, Reverend Dr. Yeary, since he just pitched it up to you.
The thoughts are kind. I appreciate the comments. Chief Davis is in leadership in the department in the town where actually I was formed, framed, and met Reverend Jackson. That's where my life changed as a senior at what was once Durham High School. These moments matter. They matter because there's some young person who is watching what we do in real time, looking for there to be an impression made that's going to inspire them to maybe have a midlife crisis to do more good. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. I appreciate all of you in your service. We've got to get in these rooms where it is happening. The first room where it is happening is called the ballot box. And so if we don't get in that room first, then we consent to whatever we get out of the process, be it for good or ill. And so I'm looking forward to partnering with all of you. Reverend has given me the dutiful assignment to be chief of the Washington Bureau for Rainbow Push. So Congressman Johnson, Senator Warren, you will be seeing me. I'll be coming in on the train. We'll be walking around together, stirring up some trouble. And so I'm glad to know that they are partners and allies. Sister Barbara, you know the deal, and Mayor McKinley Price in Newport News, you and your colleagues, this is big work. You all have a key role in transforming this whole thing because use of force policies, some of these SOPs that departments are using don't require legislation. They just require good leadership. Let's make the changes that are necessary where we are, and I'll be there to fight with you all along the way. Thank you, Santita, for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you very much. Attorney Arnwine, closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much, Reverend Jackson. You know I love you. You are everything. Thank you for everything you do. Santita, keep doing all the great work. I want to give a big shout out and thanks to all of Gen Z that has been leading this fight in the streets. Thank you. You have refused to turn away for 11 days. We're on the 12th day now. Thank you for all of your leadership. People were talking bad about your generation and saying, where are they? They're whatever. And you have shown us who you really are. Thank you, Gen Z, for all of your leadership, for that age group from 18 on up, to 37 who have been just really doing this work. Thank you. I also want to tell people that if you're sitting there and you're saying, how do I learn more about voting rights? How can I get involved? How can I make a difference? Remember, voter registration in some states is down by 90% because of COVID shutdown. So there hasn't been the voter registration drives. We need to double down on voter registration. If you want to help, you can go to votingrightsalliance.org. votingrightsalliance.org. That's my organization. You're going to find a lot of information, including on policing, a lot of information. And I can't wait, Congressman Johnson, to join you in pushing for this bill and make sure that we have, the strongest, most positive, amazing legislation. It sounds great, and let's make sure we take it all the way. But people, join us, votingrightsalliance.org. And lastly, thank you so much, Mayor Price. Love the work you're doing. Newport News is amazing. And Chief Davis, I lived in Durham for almost 10 years, went to Duke for law school, and love that whole area and really appreciate your leadership of Noble, for whom we have partnered now for 5 years, and really have great respect for everything you said today, and just admire who you are, and really want to thank you for your leadership, because leadership is everything. Vote, people. June 9th, Georgia. Be on board, be on deck. Let's do this thing. Thanks so much.
The Right Reverend Attorney Barbara Arnwine. This is her ministry. I am not kidding, and I love it because this is ministry for each one of you. Durham, North Carolina Police Chief, the head of Noble. Madam President. CJ Davis, please help us. What are our marching orders? What do you need us to do? How can we support you? And what can police do better to support the citizenry?
Well, I believe that we are already well down the road of change. I think we cannot miss this moment. We absolutely have to look at this as a pivotal time in this industry. And as I mentioned before, Noble is just one association out of many. But we are so uniquely positioned to tell the true story about what is occurring in police agencies around the country. We're not working in a silo. We have aligned ourselves with other chiefs that don't look like us, who also know and understand how important it is for our industry to change. So we are continuing to try to galvanize, these individuals and work together and support legislation like Representative Hank Johnson is talking about. On June 10th, which is this Wednesday, we will also be testifying before the Judiciary Committee as it relates to some of these very concepts that Senator Warren has brought out, Representative Hank Johnson, Barbara Arnwine. We are going to continue to speak as a force multiplier on everybody's legislation that's pushing us in a different direction. So I just thank you all for using us as servants to whatever you need us to do, whatever platforms you need us to work on, we are here for you. So we look forward to change.
Before we bring on Reverend Jackson, the founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition, Rainbow, and all of the work that he's done through the years, we thank you for your service, Reverend Jackson, for more than 50 years. Before I get to you and your closing comments, none of this would be possible today, quite frankly, without one of your tireless foot soldiers, the National Political Director for the Rainbow Push Coalition, who has traveled at your side for almost 20 years. And I must say, I'm breaking a bit of protocol as your daughter. It has given me so much comfort knowing that this man has been with you, particularly as we've watched you wrestle with Parkinson's disease, and yet you are tireless. You are tireless. And the person who has really been most responsible day in and day out to helping you to get up and keep going has been Shelley Davis. He did not want to speak to us today. And I said, I'm not going to make him do that. Maybe it's because he has a beard because of COVID-19.
Thank you.
But I could not acknowledge all of the tireless phone calls and gathering this esteemed panel together and making sure that he kept me up with what was happening on Facebook, IG. But everybody, like I said, it warrants, you have so much support, Chief Davis. And oh my gosh, everyone wants Senator Warren to be the vice president. But Reverend Jackson, your thoughts?
Let me say thanks to all of you. Shelley, our producer, and Reverend Todd Yeri, who's already in Louisville. We're going to Louisville today. Raise 3 issues. One, the Brianna's birthday celebration with our family let balloons loose today in Louisville. One, we want the Supreme Court and the federal anti-lynching bill. We're going to challenge Rand Paul in the state of Kentucky. He's against it. Police should not have sovereign immunity from honoring the law, as well as the notion that mayors must have the ability to deal with police standards, not just be trapped by the FOP. Besides focusing on the policing, the issue of Code 19, many who are marching to stop Code Blue, the laws of Code 19, the distancing and the hand sanitizing and congregating. I hope we don't have a spike in Corona next week. A spike in this week. That's very important, it seems to me. Lastly, is that coming back to content, Brother Hank and Sister Warren. If you get a Democratic president and Democratic this and that, let's have comprehensive health care. Bernie and Warren lost the delegate battle. They won the content battle. Every American must have health care. We must fight for that this time around, for everybody. If the driver is not healthy, the driven is not healthy. The cook is not healthy, the cooked for is not healthy. So we must have, it's a moral imperative, leave nobody out. Second issue about content is the issue of education. The wealth have become, some people become billionaires during the pandemic. And so the idea of the wealth tax, $50 billion HBCUs, bullets out there I've heard all my life. 50 billion for HBCUs, which is a kind of reparation of sort. And you talked about that a lot, as well as the issue of consumer protection. We face the battle now of paying more for less, living under stress, and not living as long. So I want to thank you today for allowing us to focus on the George Floyd case and the policing issue. COVID-19, we'll talk about it in the coming days ahead, as well as the issue of poverty. Vote, but the vote must count.
Yes.
But those for whom we vote must represent our interests. We want a comprehensive health care bill, student loan debt forgiveness, we want our debt to count, and want the wealth tax to in fact apply to those who need it the most. So again, Elizabeth, thank you very much, Senator Warner, for being with us today. The other very special guests, as we go forward, because we have the burden of 3 pandemics: the corona pandemic, poverty, and policing at the same time. And yet we see census is upon us, census counting, and voting is upon us, and the vote counting it. So we have about 6 things happening: the vote and the vote counting between now and election day, and the census, as well as policing and poverty and healthcare. Again, we go to the Louisville today to stand with Breonna's family. We hope that we convince Senator Paul to change his mind and challenge President Reagan to sign the anti-lynching bill.
President Trump.
Trump.
Was that Freudian? I'm just kidding. I don't know.
Reagan didn't think that he would sign the King birthday bill.
It's true.
But the people moved. And so if we move enough, he'll have the opportunity to sign or not sign anti-lynching bill. That's a big deal to me. I also think that I said to a youth in Minnesota, and I said, look, young man, I said, registered police, I'm not going to vote, I'm not in the system. I said, well, if the police had killed Greg, if he came to court, would you in jury? I'd vote against him. I said, only those who register vote can be in jury. She said, 18-year-olds must register and vote because they have the power to change that situation. So again, comprehensive health care, the wealth tax, the federal anti-lynching bill, police sovereign immunity laws must change. And we as people must do a big thing, learn to live together. We survived apart, learn to live together. That means, Marlon, learn to live together.
Mm-hmm.
Learn to live together.
Everyone, this has been a magnificent, magnificent gathering, and we thank you for allowing us, Senator Warren and Mayor Price and Congressman Johnson and Barbara Arnwine, Attorney Barbara Arnwine, Shelley Davis, who was a stickler for time, and Reverend Todd Geary, and of course, Chief C.J. Davis, President of Noble. Thank you for running over with us in this most important conversation, the Rainbow Push Coalition National Elected Town Hall Town Hall meeting of the Rainbow Push. I'm now doing what I'd caution my father against doing, speaking too fast. How about that? I got trapped in it. But thank you all so much for being with us. And we hope that those of you, thank you, who are watching us today, as Reverend Jackson has said down through the years, we need your support at Rainbow Push. We really, really do, in order to stay open, to do the work that he is doing, in order to help advocate. Senator Warren and Congressman Johnson, and of course, Mayor Price, you're bombarded with lobbyists all the time. Well, Rainbow Push and organizations like ours are your lobbyists. We're the people's lobbyists, and we need your support. So please consider giving us your support. Please reach out to us at rainbowpush.org. Call us throughout the week at 773-FREEDOM, 773-FREEDOM. And we have Christmas every day. Put us under your Christmas tree as we feed our children, as we seek to give hope to those who are without hope. But Reverend Jackson, as you say, I'm going to cue it up for you. You tell us what we need to do every day, which is what? To keep what?
You won't believe, but let me say, on the content-wise, we feed 12,000 people a week. Now, we worked out with Sean Penn. We have 6 testing sites in Chicago. We need to fund those testing sites. People must be tested. The cameras have shifted to policing. With Corona, we're 110,000 people and rising. So please observe those medical protocols. Please fight for comprehensive health care. Please fight for a fairer share of wealth to be among all of our people. Senator Warren, thank you so very much.
Thank you. And God bless you. And as you can see, because of the work that we're doing, please give us your support, everybody. Senator Warren, Chief Davis, Mayor
Santita,
Price. Yes, sir.
Santita, don't forget about answering up to the census either.
Yeah,
Still
Right, sir.
opportunity
Very
to
important.
get those responses in.
Very
Please.
quickly, why? Because Blacks are more likely not to participate in the census. Please, can you speak to that just very quickly?
Well, it's the 3 R's: representation through reapportionment, resources, dollars coming into our communities, and respect. So if you don't answer up to the census, you don't get the respect, you don't get the resources, hundreds of millions, if not billions, I'm sorry, hundreds of billions of federal dollars flowing into our communities based on population count. So if you don't answer the census, you don't get the money. You also don't get the number of representatives that you are due on the local, state, or federal level. So it's important that you answer up completely to the census. Don't be afraid, because that information is not shared with any other agency. It stays right there in the census agency for the next 75 years. So nobody will ever know who's living with you, but the census needs to know who is in that household. We need to give an accurate count so that our voices can be counted both at the ballot box and in representation, and also in terms of dollars flowing into our community. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. But Shelley Davis, I think our producer here, he has yet another town hall to produce, because we do need to speak about the census. Yes.
Thanks, everybody. I greatly appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
Reverend
Shelley Davis.
Armline, I didn't mean to forget you either. Thank you. You're the bomb too.
No, you're great. Thank you.
Bombdiggity.com. We love you
Can't
all.
wait.
Thank you so much.
Can't wait to work on this bill. Thank you.
God bless
Thank you,
you.
Senator Warren. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye now.
you. Goodbye.
Can't wait to work with you, Chief
Bye.
Davis, some more. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Mayor Price. Bye-bye.